What's up? What's up? I'm Dr. Omatma, host of Egg Meets Sperm, where we're busting fertility myths, sharing tangible tips for your fertility journey, and bringing you the most knowledgeable guests to support your journey to parenthood. This podcast is for both women and men because getting fertile as fuck is for both partners, don't you think? Remember, just listening to this podcast won't get you pregnant, but following the tips we share just may. Let's get you fertile AF so that you can co-create the family you dream of. And if your partner's not listening to this, make sure to share this episode with your partner. Hello and welcome to Egg Meets Sperm. My guest today is a really special woman who is a friend, a colleague, and she has a very interesting story. When Sarah Clark was 28 years old, she received a diagnosis of premature ovarian failure. She accepted the diagnosis and had both her children through in vitro fertilization. Years later, she realized the root cause of her infertility was a food sensitivity and later a gut infection. She's a certified life coach with accreditation from the International Coaches Federation and a health coach with training from the Institute for Integrative Nutrition. She's the author of Fabulously Fertile, Supercharge Your Fertility Naturally. Her fertility coaching program, which includes functional lab testing, supports couples to make diet and lifestyle changes that dramatically improve the chances of a healthy pregnancy and baby. On her Get Pregnant Naturally podcast, she shares that with functional medicine and natural fertility solutions, we eventually can reverse infertility. Check it out on iTunes and Spotify. Welcome, Sarah. I'm so excited to have you here today.
Hey, I'm excited to be here.
So I know one of your specialties is premature ovarian insufficiency, being that you went through it yourself. So tell me a little bit about what that is. Like, if you want to weave in there, like, what about that diagnosis for yourself? What did it feel like? And how was that process for you?
Yeah, basically, at that stage, they weren't looking at the anti-Mullerian hormone. They were just looking at FSH. So for me, my FSH was in the 90s. And so, I was diagnosed with this at 28 when I'm ready to go and have my family, because I'm like this big planner. I get married at 25, going to have my children at 28, went off birth control, and then woohoo, here we go. And then my cycles were still irregular. So I was told, because they looked at, and also for premature ovarian insufficiency, they also will look at other genetic factors like Turner syndrome or Fragile X and more. I didn't have any of those. I don't even think they did an ultrasound or anything. They just looked at my FSH. It was high and went, okay, premature ovarian insufficiency or failure as it was called. And I was told like donor eggs are my only option. So remember the OBGYN just grabbing the IVF brochure and said, here you go. And I am like a person of action. But it's interesting. I didn't get a second opinion with this. And I went straight to the clinic to get on the list for donor eggs. I actually thought I had it easier than other people that had to go through, years of IVF with hormones and trying to get their own eggs to work, that I was like, look, I'm going to fast track this thing and I'm going to use donor eggs and get on the list. Obviously, that's not the case, right? There was grief and a lot of like shock, which I probably didn't process until years later, where I'm like, okay, when I said to people, I've got to use donor eggs, and I started asking my friends, hey, do you want to be a donor for me? Most people didn't even know what I was even saying, donor eggs. Like now we've got, I think it's still not as common, but it's maybe more known. Like my daughter's 20, my son's 17, and both were from donor eggs, separate donor eggs. And then years later, my health began to suffer, and I discovered I had these food sensitivities and gut infections, and all of it actually was chronic stress, like under the underlying piece. And as someone who just goes, I actually wouldn't even have said I was stressed out. Even to this day, I have to actually stop and say, Sarah, okay, you're getting out of alignment here. It's probably stress. So it's those pieces where, and people that we work with that have been told it's POI. And sometimes, if it is really low, like but even then, even if there's people getting pregnant with AMH of 0. So if it can work for them, it can work for you. But to not myopically focus on the numbers in front of you with the high FSH. We just had someone who had, she went through multiple IVFs, was told that donor eggs are her only option. She was a poor responder. The IVFs didn't work. Her FSH was always in the 70s or 80s. Doctor said donor eggs, did the program. Within 7 months, her FSH was down to 7, and then she opted for an IVF and it worked. Mm-hmm. So it was multiple food sensitivities, heavy metal exposure. She had chronic stress. She had a lot of gut infections and more. So there's always things to address. I think people worry that, oh my goodness, here's this diagnosis, it's devastating diagnosis of POI, and coaching a lot of people through this. We all handle it differently. I went straight into action and put on my let's go to work hat. Other people are like, oh my goodness, they're like not able to even move for like months or a year, really. So it's to honor where you are. It doesn't, like, each person will handle it differently, and there's no right answer, especially, all of this is, your dreams of your family of how this was going to work. I didn't dream was not for me to, have donor eggs and go to a clinic and have this all done that way. That was not in my plan. So a lot of it is it can be very, obviously traumatizing.
Yeah. And there's like so much in what you just shared. It's like at 28, 27, you're not really expecting there to be issues with your life plan, right? And I find that that's true for so many of us. Like in our heads, we've created this plan and we don't necessarily know what is going to unfold there. Secondarily, it sounds like you were on birth control and had irregular cycles prior to that. So, right. And this is frequent too, is like birth control kind of covers up the symptoms. It tricks your brain into thinking that you're having regular cycles when you're not, right? Like it's just a Band-Aid that as soon as you pull the Band-Aid off, it's going to be right back to where you were. And then third, this idea of like, how stressed am I? And oftentimes I would definitely relate to this. Like I am equally like when I was 25, 26, people were like, oh, you must be really stressed out. And I'm like, what? No. And so we have this like weird idea of how much we can handle and what is our capacity. And until our hormones start reflecting something different, we don't actually accept that it could be something different, right? Stress and FSH, like that's a really interesting connection. I'm wondering if you see crazy high FSH levels when women are extremely under stress, and often it's like acute stress, but it can also be like really chronic, like long-term stressors too.
Yeah, we see that a lot where people, the underlying worry on all of this, and I get messages all the time, am I in menopause? Am I done? And, so premature ovarian insufficiency is not menopause. And so I think but it is like the constant like panic that I've gone into menopause and it's too late for me and it's over. And so the diagnosis in itself is stressful. So a well-meaning physician, reproductive endocrinologist, a very, highly trained person may have told you, this is what it is. Donor eggs are your only option. Food or diet or lifestyle is not going to have an impact on this. Like it's still, when I was diagnosed with this, 20 years ago, there was little forums and little chat groups. And, it was like this horrible, your bones are going to fall apart. You're going to get heart disease and you better go on HRT right now. And you're in a panic. So there's not much change actually with the conventional approach to this. It's like doomsday where, we're seeing people getting pregnant naturally after these diagnosis. So, but yeah, with the stress piece, so the diagnosis in itself can be stressful. We see a lot of people that have experienced trauma, and it may not, and so many people come to us with this actually, and they may have been dealing with an autoimmune disease. And I ask kind of, well, what happened before the autoimmune disease? It might have been in high pressure job, very like schooling, that a lot of things kind of come out if you're in, university, college, maybe a move, a divorce, relationship issues. So it's interesting to see how people, because again, myself, if I look back and I'm like, I wouldn't say there's some trauma, but I think it was just, when I look back, it was like my house, my brother and my dad like fought constantly. They don't speak to this day. They were always throwing stuff at each other. There's always like people yelling. And I was just like, how do I get out of here? But it was still like, I don't know. I think of my childhood as a good upbringing, but I think when the people that are constantly in combat with each other, just, so much friction with the two of them. And, and it caused my brother like a lot of problems, and the two of them don't speak to this day, which is, I still can't believe they don't do speak, but because I'm like a forgiving person, but apparently they're not. So there's trauma in that upbringing. And then because of I'm like, let's do it a certain way. But the controlling piece, which I didn't even think I was controlling, but, as we look at this further, how you want to have the plan and you want to control it, and you're getting married at 25 and you're having the baby at 28 and all this, and then it doesn't kind of go according to plan. Now I can actually pivot fairly well, or can I? So it is to actually be able to examine that piece, right? See, you think you're okay, and I'm able to really reframe things too, that other people had it worse than me. And so like, that's sort of some of my strengths is that I'm able to reframe things. But then it's important to, like, that's, hashtag self-care, to really pull back, see where you can just be a little softer with yourself. It's not all about pushing, like always pushing. Like, how do you pull back to then move forward? So identifying, that's why in our program, we take a mind, body, spirit approach. We can do the biochemical, we can address the thyroid, we can look at look at the food sensitivities, gut infections. But first of all, if you don't believe it's going to work, because this diagnosis is, devastating, if you don't believe it's going to work, potentially there's going to be self-sabotage. You just can't quite visualize it. So that part is really key. And just to tap into your intuition, be it God, universe, spirit, like all of that is very important to help you trust yourself on this. And a lot of times, we've outsourced to someone else. We've got to ask everyone else's opinion on what I should do. We need to listen to the person in the white coat. Like, we know our body best, and really to be empowered and to know that, there's changes that you can make to improve this.
Yeah, I love all of this. And I want to ground us into what the commonly accepted definitions and diagnosis for all of this is. So premature ovarian insufficiency, or POI, as we call it for short. And then there is diminished ovarian reserve, which is a slightly different scenario. And then traditional menopause, where you're actually in menopause. Can we just break down for our listeners, like, what are the differences and how do you know which category you're in? And does it matter? In my opinion, like, I might be biased and we have like a really great working relationship. So I do find that people that are kind of outside of the realm of what I believe I can help, I send them over to you. I feel like there are these little nuances in which, from my side, I've seen be successful, and then others that I haven't really had success with, and I refer them out. So what are, in your opinion, like, what do you see as like the traditional diagnosis, POI, DOR, menopause?
Yeah, like the POI is where you've got, and this is not like as far as a diagnosis, because we don't necessarily focus on the numbers, right? So people come in, they've already had the testing, they've been given the diagnosis based on if they have high, and I don't know the exact category, like what the, maybe but like as far as an FSH over a certain amount.
Yeah.
We have people coming to us. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So technically, menopause is essentially FSH is over 20. So that's the technical term. And I almost like those women that are between FSH between 15 and 20. And what I've been noticing is that the FSH and LH will kind of go up together in menopause. When you have like an extravagantly high FSH, but LH is completely normal, that is not menopause. So this is where it's like helpful to get all of the numbers and really know is your body going into early menopause? And often, almost always, it's not, right? Like, it's not menopause until like well into our 40s. Granted, everyone's different, but in general, this is a very big generalization. But those women that have FSH above 50, 100, I've seen as high as like 170, those women are not in menopause at all. So I feel like that's where we can get into like, is it POI? Is it DOR? Do you want to speak to, I know you don't do necessarily diagnosis, but do you have, from what you've seen, what you've experienced, where you see people fall?
Yeah, like we're helping both, right? And so we have a team of nutrition practitioners and have a physician on our team as well. And so really we ask a very in-depth health history of what kind of conventional testing have you done, but then your conventional doctor potentially is not looking at any of the other factors like missed healing opportunities that we wouldn't even think. That, I didn't think the fact that I had acne, in my early 20s was contributing to my POI. I didn't think the fact that dark circles under my eyes, which might have been a indicator of a food sensitivity, which I started having, around 12. I didn't know I had, nutrient deficiencies because of I was on, long-term birth control. So we see all of this. So although people come in and they've already done the medical testing, they've been told here, they've been assigned this label, POI, DOR, and been told donor eggs are your only option is really what it is. We don't focus on those diagnoses. We look at the other issues going on from the chemical. We see, issues with thyroid. We see issues with blood sugar, all of that. And so I know because it can get very scary to get caught up in those conventional numbers when you're, above 20, if you're told, that it's done. Obviously there has to be a certain amount of, I don't even know though, because, sometimes you may be in menopause. And so that's something that we check on your blood work with our team. So just to see each month, what's happening with your hormone levels and then all the other blood work that we're looking for. So it's just not about myopically focusing on those numbers, although they are part of the equation and we do ask.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I know that a low AMH is so much fun because everyone kind of like focuses in and hones in on that number. So in your experience, is there an AMH that's just too low?
People say below 0.03, that's too low. But like if someone's gotten pregnant with point, again, that's an indicator of how well you'll do with IVF. Maybe no one's even looked at the fact the person has an autoimmune disease. They have Hashimoto's, they have celiac. They've got blood sugar that's bouncing around all day long. They've got chronic stress from trauma, childhood abuse or trauma that's not, hasn't been addressed. As we start to reduce get you out of that fight or flight and get you into the parasympathetic and to not have you all with shoulders up like this and feeling you got to fight your way through it. Cause, we work with busy, type A, typically medical professionals, mm-hmm. doctors and nurses who that in itself, the job in itself can be traumatic. And then people that are just, let's just keep going. Like the plan I've had has had me be very successful with your career and more. And now I'm going to apply that same drive to fertility. And fertility is, opening up to receive. Mm-hmm. We're not like clenched in like this. So again, we ask for all that information. It's very part of the puzzle, but it's like that healing roundtable where you have your OBGYN, you have your reproductive endocrinologist, but you also have your nutrition practitioner, your massage therapist, your chiro, your acupuncturist, not all at once, because that's too overwhelming, but you bring them in as you see fit and you're in the middle. Mm-hmm. So you're in charge of your own health. And we use each practitioner as we see fit. And typically with a fertility diagnosis, you're like, oh, here's my diagnosis, low AMH and high FSH. Oh my goodness. I go straight to IVF. And they have got you in a panic of like, your eggs are too old. You're too old. Your time is running out. We had better run to get you through multiple IVFs. Let's go. And so that just is the opposite of receiving. Yeah. And so it gets you all like, just stressed and feeling in a very contracted instead of a, receiving place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's essentially like more energy that created the exact scenario that we're in, right? It's like more of that control and more tightening down and more like essentially we're trying to control the hormones at this point if we're doing IVF. So it's really like shifting that pattern, shifting out of the place that created the problem and saying like, what's the bigger picture? What else is happening that could be contributing to how it is that I'm having the experience that I'm having? Right? So yeah, absolutely. I agree with that so much. And I think that that's a really key point is we're at that point in our advancement as a society to be able to say, hey, I need to have a different energy to approach fertility, because in nature, fertility is this opening, receiving energy. And if I'm not doing that, I'm working against my own nature.
I agree. Yeah. And it is to recognize that and have someone call you out on it, because many of the times, if that's just if you're stuck in that masculine pushing, driving, achieving, and then we're like, oh, wait, we want you to be in the feminine energy. And we all have it, men and women. And so it's maybe the teeter-totter is like, woo, a little bit, and it's served you so far. It's got you to where you are. But then how do we bring it back into balance a little bit? And so for me, it wasn't natural to be like, ooh, we're going to slow down. What do you mean? I gotta have my foot on the gas pedal going 400 miles an hour down the road. I remember like even in high school, I'd be walking down the hallway, like running down the hallway. I'm like, where am I running to? I don't know. I just wanted to be there first and get there fast. And so, and eat fast and do everything quickly. Just like my dad's like an entrepreneur. He's like super impatient. And I'm literally, he'd stop the car. And if you're not with your seatbelt out and you out the car immediately, you'd be like, oh my God, you're too slow. So I just grew up with that, like, let's kind of go thing. And I like that because it served me, but also how do I pull it back? And that's equally as impactful. And there's not a weakness, because there's not a weakness to that. That is like strength in there, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's because our culture has so prioritized this masculine energy, this approach, and it's fine. The masculine energy has served me too. Like, we can look through our lives and be like, I wouldn't be where I am right now if it wasn't for all the masculine energy. However, when we don't have that balance, or we're not able to shift back and forth, that's when it becomes problematic. It's like we become masculine dominant rather than embracing our masculine, embracing our feminine, and using the powers of both as we need them.
Yeah, I agree. The more I tune into, for me, like the universe piece, like my intuition, I don't need to like, oh, there's a problem. Let me ask 20 of my friends and what do they think? No, I have to go back to what feels right for me. And that's like really trusting yourself. And there's been a lot of work on that too that I've done to dig into that. Like, we know we all have that intuition, right? If something's not right, and every time I've gone against it, I'm like, oh boy, here we go. And so then it just gives me I used to always feel this frustration of like, I could literally envision myself banging my head against the wall. Like, this go. I'm like, and now it's like each day we just move a little bit. And so that's the same in the fertility journey, right? Each day you move along, and it's not you speeding down the highway at 100, miles an hour. Each day you're like, wait a minute, I'm going to focus on my sleep. Today I'm going to choose to eat a food that heals me. I'm going to say no when that person wants me to say yes. Like, I choose me. I really like that, putting yourself first, like self-care, but like you've got to be first to be able to mother yourself now before your child comes, or if you're to add to your family, to put you first.
Right. And that process is going to continue. And I think that fertility challenges, and then essentially like they're a great way to prepare for motherhood in a sense, because your child is going to test you every single day. They're going to make it all about them, right? Like, that's what children do in a way. Like, me. I need attention. I need this. I need that. I have a 3.5-year-old. So we're in that phase where it's all about him all the time. And we just have to be like, stop. Like, we need a break from this. And this is not happening. And being able to pull away and say, hey, I need an hour to meditate, or I need an hour to do my own thing. And that's super important, because otherwise, like, we're just going to end up repeating cycles that we don't intentionally want to repeat.
Yeah, and it can be hard for secondary infertility too, right? If you already have a child and then you're trying to focus on yourself, and then you feel guilty because you're not spending time with the child. So this mixed emotion of you want another child. And then we work with a lot of people with secondary infertility too. So it can be, people think, oh my goodness, you should be grateful for your child, the child you have. And of course you are, but for secondary infertility, you feel a gap in your family, and like another person should be there. And so it's equally as painful. It's not like a level of pain on the pain chart.
Absolutely. Okay. So what are some ways, and you've mentioned it, there's a lot of underlying causes with premature ovarian insufficiency. Can you highlight some of the common themes that you've seen with women that have POI? So
the first thing we see non-celiac gluten sensitivity. So gluten is off the chart for people, even if they've been tested for celiac, and the conventional celiac test only tests for proteins in wheat, and there's over 60 or more. So there's a lot of false negatives on that. So we're doing food sensitivity testing. There's no perfect food sensitivity test. It's, a snapshot in time, but a theme that we see is literally gluten off the chart. Even if people are gluten free, they perhaps are reacting to the cross reactors such as corn, dairy, oats, chocolate, coffee, more and more. So non-celiac gluten sensitivity, that's the case for me. When I have gluten, it causes a whole cascade of fun stuff in my body and it wasn't because we normally think of celiac or we think of gut issues. So for me, it was never digestion. Digestion was always imperfect, but then I had acne. And then I also had like mood issues, irritability. I just thought I was an irritable pain in the butt for part of my life. I can still go to irritability, but now I can see what's, when I've gone off, if there's a blood sugar imbalance, but also the underlying food sensitivity for me. And then also it can be joint issues. I had eczema. So we see all of these themes with our people that we work with, our clients, evidence of food sensitivity, and gluten is the number one. So it's one of the top allergens. So we see that.
And essentially, for those of you that are listening, like food sensitivities, again, I'll just reiterate what Sarah said, is not just digestive symptoms. It's not gas, bloating, diarrhea, constipation. Food sensitivities can manifest in a whole host of global symptoms throughout the body that are more generic and harder to pick up on. They're like, oh, I have random joint pain. And like the number of times I've heard women as well as friends say, oh, I must be getting old. And I look at them and I'm like, aren't you like 30? How? You're not getting old. Those are that's your body saying something is out of whack. So really like paying attention to when things shift, right? Like you have a way that you have lived and you feel in your body. And then suddenly or over time, you're like, oh, I suddenly have joint pain all the time. Or I feel like my brain is foggy and fuzzy and I can't function the way I used to. Or the eczema, like skin symptoms, are a really clear trigger to food sensitivities. Things like eczema and psoriasis, which normally you're given steroids for, make it go away. That is not getting at what is really happening under the surface. And I've seen this over and over and over again where women are like, oh, well, I don't have it anymore. I'm like, yeah, but you had it at some point. You suppressed it with steroids. And most of the time it's like, well, it pops up whenever I'm stressed or it pops up randomly and I can't really figure out why. So all of those types of symptoms, you guys pay attention to it because those are little blinking lights that you may have food sensitivities. And there's a really big connection of food sensitivities and gut health to fertility and especially premature ovarian insufficiency. So just to like echo exactly what you said and like reiterate, because I think it's so important.
Yeah, we see that. And then same before, people are like, oh, wow, I used to be intolerant to dairy, but now I'm fine with it. Really? So it's interesting. It's just, to get honest about some of that because it can suck. I don't do dairy, gluten, or corn. And so, so getting rid of some of your favorite foods. So to be honest about yourself that, oh, wait, when I have that, it gives me digestive issues. When I have dairy, it gives me sinus issues. To be honest about it, because it's kind of like sometimes we hear people say, oh, I know that gives me a problem, but then I keep eating it. If you know there's a problem, stop eating it. It's not just stop eating it forever, unless it's like really high sensitivity. But if you take it out for 60 to 90 days, work on gut infections, healing your gut, potentially you can bring most of the foods back in. Like at one point, did a food sensitivity test. I was intolerant to all my favorite foods because I had leaky gut and all the, I was on antibiotics, which then can, impact your gut lining. So your body, starts mounting an immune response to your favorite foods. And so I remember like avocados, all the things that I normally ate, I was sensitive to. As I healed my gut, worked on, taking out some of these inflammatory foods, eventually I can bring those back. So for POI and, DOR, we see non-celiac gluten sensitivity. And then another one we see a lot is a thyroid imbalance. So many people being told their TSH is normal. And then no one's looked at the full thyroid panel. No one's looked at antibodies. So we're always doing a deep dive into the full thyroid panel. And we're not diagnosing. So we're reviewing the blood chemistry for education. And then we're either seeing hypothyroidism that's not diagnosed. We could see Hashimoto's Graves. We more often see Hashimoto's, so autoimmune issues. And then we may see just subclinical thyroid issues where it's not the thyroid, it's actually the gut or the liver. So yeah, so it's 99% of people, even I would say 100% of people, there's something up with the thyroid, even if you've been told it's normal. So that can impact menstruation, ovulation, and cycles, and way more. So and miscarriage, as you know, and things. So it's important to really optimize the thyroid. And even if you've said it's normal, like, have you had a functional person look at it? So it looks at it before it goes to disease. It just flags it earlier. So that was a case for me where I was told my thyroid was fine at 3.5 on TSH. And typically, I think many of us know
3.5.
Many of us know even for fertility, go to your RE, they want it below 2 or 1 or 2 or 1.5. But my skin was as dry as a lizard. My hair was falling out. My extremities were cold. Oh no, your thyroid's fine. Well, no, it wasn't.
Yeah. It's like so far from fine. And again, your body is telling you these signs and symptoms that you're experiencing. You're not crazy. And if your doctor tells you that everything's normal, it's all in your head, or nothing's wrong, or it's not connected to fertility, think twice. Because
run the other way.
Yeah. It's like the Instagram reel that's been going around, like something, run.
Yeah, saw that one.
I love it because it's
Dr. Mama is killing it on her reels, so check her out.
I've just been having so much fun with it because it's like, once you get into it, it's like such a unique way to share little snippets into things to help educate. So I'm addicted.
I'm doing mine too. I don't care if they're geeky or whatever. I'm like, I'm just going to do them.
Yes. Okay. This is awesome. So are there any last words of wisdom that you would like to share with our listeners?
Yeah, really, with these diagnoses, it is to get a second opinion, typically outside of the conventional box. Know that if it's worked for someone else, it can work for you. Really not to focus myopically on those numbers, the FSH, the AMH. Obviously, you need to know your numbers, and we test that as part of it. But it's to look, what are the other missed healing opportunities? Is there a thyroid issue? Do you have food sensitivity thing going on? Maybe you have a gut infection. Maybe you have a parasite, and it's not just about getting parasite from when you travel. You can get parasites in North America or Europe, or, wherever you are. And if there's an infection happening, your body wants to survive, not procreate. And then, getting on, like we talked about with the stress piece. So if you're like a type A, like go, to really get honest. And it's not about quitting your job, although many people have to scale back, but it's like, is there something in your current career where you can ask for what you need and set some boundaries around that? It's not about you working more than 50 hours a week and, we see many people working 80 hours a week. So where do you pull back? It can be hard, right? To look at yourself and go, oh, wait a minute. Yeah, I can see over there, see what I'm doing here, see what maybe if you're having a whole bunch of road rage and, so honest with that, get support. You're not alone. And it's empowering to know that you can make these very targeted steps and see change and get pregnant naturally.
Yeah, absolutely. I love this so much. Thank you so much for being here. How can our listeners get in touch with you? And I know you have a gift for our listeners. So if you want to share what that is.
Yeah, so they can find me on Get Pregnant Naturally. So do weekly episodes on there on iTunes or Spotify. I have a fertility diet challenge. So there's all filled with chef prepared recipes. They can go to Fertility Diet Freebie. So fertilitydietfreebie.com and pick that up. And then I also run masterclasses on really how to improve low AMH and high FSH. So put on by myself and my team to really help you look at this completely differently.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And for all of you listening in, make sure to tune back in for all of Sarah's amazing tips. We'll have those coming up soon. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Was that an amazing episode or what? Make sure to check our show notes so that you can link up with our guests. And if you're not a part of our secret Fertile AF community, you can join for free via the link in our show notes. Last but not least, have you showed us some love lately? It would mean the world to us if you could share and review our podcast. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time on Egg Meets Sperm. Peace.